As author Nancy Rips describes in her book, Seder Stories, the Jewish community enjoys Passover in the Seder, and they love to tell stories about how they observed it in the past. Helene Harpman of Oklahoma City is no exception.
I was born in New York City, and I grew up in Brooklyn in a household that had 3 generations. My grandparents, who were very Orthodox Jews, my parents, my brother and I, and assorted unmarried cousins. Because it was my grandparents' house and my grandparents had 11 children, at Passover time, that was the home. That was the house. And I remember that that day, it was craziness. All they wanted from us, from the kids, was to get out of the way. And my brother and I would go hide. We would do anything just to be out of the way of all this cooking and setting of the table and changing of the dishes. Part of the Seder, of course, is drinking the 4 cups of wine. Well, one of the kids would invariably fall asleep and his face would fall right in the dish of food in front of him. But Passover was a wonderful time growing up as a kid. Then, when I got married and moved to Oklahoma City, we started having our own Passovers. And some years, when it hit with spring break, one year we went to Estes Park and we took all of our stuff with us. And I remember calling back and forth to Sig's mother to say, how do you make matzo balls? How do you do this? Because I'd never cooked the whole Seder. It wasn't my job. And then about 30 years ago, we started having Seder every year with our friends, the Asons, and their children, because they were pretty close in age to our children. And sometimes we'd have it at home, but most of the time while they were in school, because they all went to Northeast High School and stuff, we would go to one of the state parks. One of the things when you make matzah balls, you need matzah meal, which is it's this matzah, just crushed very, very fine. And I said to Carol, where's the matzah meal? Because she always makes the matzah balls. I don't do that. I make the soup. And she said, you brought it. I said, no, you brought it. She said, no, it was your job. Well, we were at Western Hills. There was no place near that we could get matzah meal. So our son was on the golf team at Northeast, and he had to go back for a golf tournament over the weekend, and he had this Pontiac Grand Prix. So we took a whole bunch of the matzah, put it in a paper bag, put it under his wheels, and made him drive back and forth over the matzah until it came out to be very, very fine like breadcrumbs. So we call those matzah balls Grand Prix.
The Seder meal is a vital part of the Jewish holiday of Passover. Each part of the meal helps tell the story of the Israelites' exodus from Egypt, from slavery to freedom.
Every Jewish holiday starts with the lighting of the candles and a blessing over wine. That sanctifies the moment. The leader of the Seder, who's reclining on all those pillows because he's now a free man rather than a slave. Slaves couldn't recline, free men could recline. Will say a sanctification over a glass of wine, and that gets started. And that is not different from any other holiday. So a lot of the things that we do are to keep the kids involved. And each person at the table almost has his own little plate that's very similar to the plate there. Our people didn't have time to let their bread rise or whatever it is as they left Egypt. Some people say the women baked the stuff and put it on their heads and walked out, which makes a lot of sense. And we in Oklahoma know how hot it can get. So you could put it on your head and it would bake as they walked out. So the unleavened bread, and that's to remind you, this is poor bread. But this is what our ancestors ate in Egypt. You'll see that there is a lamb shank, and that is for one of the sacrifices, the Passover sacrifice that was offered after the exodus from Egypt in the temple. When the temple was destroyed, all sacrifices ceased. We do not sacrifice anymore. The one then to the right is the bitter herb, and that's to remind us of how bitter life was in Egypt. Next to that is the parsley, a sign of spring and renewal. Passover is always the 15th day of the first month of the Hebrew calendar, Nisan, and so it's always spring. Next on the plate is some watercress that's called chazeret, and it's what I'm using as another bitter herb. There's a time during the Seder when it says you should eat the charosis and the bitter herb together, so they decided to have 2 bitter herbs. The next thing is the mixture of, this is apples and almonds and wine and cinnamon and sugar. Some people use dates. It depends on where your family came from. I'm sure it's like turkey dressing. Everyone has his own recipe for turkey dressing. And so this is supposed to look like the mortar that the Jews had to use when they made the bricks in Egypt when they were still slaves. And we have to remember how bitter their life was. And the last is the egg, is the roasted egg. There were 2 sacrifices that were offered at Passover, and that's a symbol of the second sacrifice. A lot of people have made their own Elijah's cup. There are some traditions where the people from the table actually fill the cup. Well, if you spill wine on the table before, can you imagine if everyone poured a little into there? You'd really have a mess. The little bowls that you see are salt water, and that's for the tears. At the beginning of the Seder, we actually dip the parsley into the salt water, and you can do that if you'd like, Carla. You dip the parsley into the salt water and you eat it because you're remembering the tears of your people as they were slaves. And believe it or not, you can make salt water too salty. I did it one year. So that's one of the dippings that we do at the service. There are 2 dippings. Further on the table, you'll see that there is a covered matzah, and it's a matzah cover, and in it has 3 compartments, and there are 3 matzahs in there. And the leader of the Seder at the very beginning will take the middle matzah, he'll break it in half, and he'll wrap it in a napkin, and he'll hide it. And the kids find it after the meal. You must have that piece of matzah to end the meal. It's like the dessert, it's called the Oklahoman. It's the last thing you're supposed to eat. If you don't have that, you have to start all over again. One year we even had to divide up the age groups because it was getting very competitive. But it's just a way of keeping them involved in the Seder. You'll see a new addition to the Seder, which is Miriam's cup. Some years ago, the women realized that Miriam and her girls had a very big part in the Exodus. They did the dancing, they did the singing, and nobody mentions them. So Woman Power came up with the idea. Miriam also is known as the woman who found the water. So they came up that if Elijah has a cup filled with wine, then Miriam should have a cup filled with water. As you can imagine, everyone puts out a new Haggadah, a new way to tell the Passover story. A lot of people write their own. There is no reason you can't write your own Seder. And then you'll see a strange item that you wonder what it is. It's supposed to be an orange. It's either a very large orange or a very small grapefruit. That, again, is a women's edition. The story goes that a woman asked her rabbi, when will women have full participation in Jewish life? Now, this is dated. I mean, this is 40 years ago. And he said, when there's an orange on the Seder plate.
Carla Hinton, the Oklahoman.